Round 6 of the FIDE Candidates 2026 Open, and the tournament leader is in the crosshairs. Javokhir Sindarov heads into this round with 4.5 points, a full point clear of Fabiano Caruana, and today he faces Wei Yi with the black pieces. Can the Uzbek prodigy extend his commanding lead, or will Wei Yi pull off the upset that could blow this tournament wide open? One decisive result and one draw in this round. Wei Yi is one of China's most celebrated talents, a deeply tactical player capable of brilliant complications who shines brightest in sharp, unbalanced positions. Javokhir Sindarov, the tournament leader, is a dynamic and resourceful player with exceptional in-game technique. Sindarov enters this game with all the confidence of a man in form, while Wei needs a win to close the gap at the top of the standings. The game opens as a bishop's opening Vienna hybrid. Flexible system where white develops the bishop to c4 and supports it with the knight on c3, avoiding the sharpest lines of the open games. This structure was a favorite of young Bobby Fischer and has seen renewed interest at the top level in recent years. The key strategic themes involve control of the d5 square, rapid development, and potential kingside pressure. The king's pawn opening, the most direct and aggressive first move, staking an immediate claim to the center and opening lines for both the bishop and the queen. Black meets in kind with the symmetrical response, claiming equal central space and establishing the classical open game tension immediately. The knight develops to its most natural square, supporting the e4 pawn and heading toward the Vienna setup rather than the mainline 1 and f3. In response, black mirrors the development with the knight to c6, defending the e5 pawn and preparing to contest the center. White places the bishop on the Italian diagonal, eyeing the sensitive f7 square and giving the position a hybrid character between the Vienna and the Italian game. Black develops the kingside knight, attacking the e4 pawn and preparing to castle short while keeping options flexible. A solid, restrained approach from white, supporting the e4 pawn and keeping the position closed rather than entering sharp tactical complications. Sindarov immediately targets the bishop on c4, a well-known maneuver in these structures to either win the bishop pair or force it to an awkward square. White prepares to retreat the bishop to i3 or simply prevent any b4 ideas, keeping the bishop active on the c4 diagonal. Black captures the bishop, forcing white to recapture and accepting a structural concession in exchange for eliminating white's important attacking piece. White takes back with the d-pawn, creating a doubled pawn on the c-file but gaining a semi-open d-file and keeping the position dynamic. A natural and powerful post for the bishop. Targeting the f2 pawn from afar and completing black's piece development with tempo. White brings the last minor piece into play, completing development on the kingside and preparing to castle. Black solidifies the center, supporting the e5 pawn and preparing to develop the dark-squared bishop. An unusual queen sortie, placing the queen on d3 where it eyes the kingside while also covering the c4 pawn, though it does leave the queen somewhat exposed. Sindarov develops the dark-squared bishop to e6, targeting the c4 pawn directly and challenging white to defend it while continuing harmonious piece coordination. White pins the knight on f6, creating pressure on black's kingside and eyeing the possibility of doubling black's pawns after an exchange. Black advances on the queenside, gaining space and preparing to push further to challenge white's queenside pawn structure. White jumps the knight to the powerful d5 outpost, a thematic idea in these structures, centralizing the knight and creating immediate threats against both c7 and f6. Black kicks the knight away from d5, giving up a bit of space, but eliminating the annoying outpost and freeing the position. White exchanges on f6, forcing the recapture and making a structural decision that will define the middle game. Black recaptures with the g-pawn, accepting a fractured kingside, but gaining a half-open g-file and keeping the bishop pair intact. White retreats the bishop to h4, maintaining pressure along the g-file diagonal and eyeing potential kingside play against the weakened pawn structure. Sindarov activates the rook immediately, placing it on the half-open g-file and creating genuine counterplay against white's kingside. White castles kingside, but notice that black's rook already sits on g8, meaning white's king heads directly into the zone where black wants to attack. And here Sindarov lashes out on the queenside, advancing the pawn to i4 with the idea of pushing further to lock white's queenside pawns in place. This is a significant moment as the engine flags a swing of nearly a full pawn in black's favor, showing that this queenside aggression creates real problems for white. White tries to hold the queen side together by pushing the pawn forward, but this creates a new vulnerability that black can immediately exploit. Black captures en passant, eliminating the b4 pawn and creating a passed pawn on b3 that will become a major long-term asset. White recaptures, and now the b3 pawn is isolated and deep in White's territory, a structural wound that will haunt the position. Now Sindarov activates the bishop with tempo, attacking the queen on d3 and forcing White to react, while Black's pieces continue to coordinate beautifully. White advances the b-pawn again, trying to create some queenside counterplay and support the center. Black eliminates the knight on f3, trading off an important defensive piece and opening the f-file further. White recaptures with the queen, centralizing it and keeping material roughly balanced for now. A fantastic square for the bishop, centralized on d4 where it dominates the board, attacks in multiple directions, and cannot easily be challenged. White captures on f6, trying to win back a pawn and disturb Black's coordination, but this is the moment where things begin to go seriously wrong. The engine shows a swing of half a pawn toward Black, meaning this capture actually worsens White's position rather than solving problems. Sindarov retreats the queen to d7, connecting the rooks and keeping the powerful bishop on d4 fully active. The engine notes a shift in Black's favor here as the position clarifies. White centralizes the rook, applying pressure along the d-file against the bishop on d4. Black repositions the queen to e6, a more active post from which it supports the center and keeps pressure on White's position. White advances the h-pawn, creating a little breathing room for the king and preventing any backrank ideas. Black snaps off the c4 pawn, gaining material and increasing the pressure on White's position. White transfers the rook to d3, preparing to double on the d-file and maintaining some activity against the centralized bishop. Sindarov swings the queen back to e6, a safe and central square, while keeping the bishop on d4 protected and menacing. White doubles the rooks on the d-file, creating significant pressure on the bishop at d4, but this turns out to be a critical error. The engine swings by nearly 3/4 of a pawn in Black's favor, suggesting White needed a different approach entirely. And here Sindarov plays the rook to g6, activating it on the g-file, but the engine actually flags this as a mistake with a swing of over 1.5 pawns. Black had better ways to consolidate, and this slightly loosens the coordination. White retreats the bishop to h4, attacking the rook on g6 and trying to take advantage of the moment. Black tucks the king to f8, stepping away from the g-file and improving king's safety, but the engine sees this as an inaccuracy with a swing of over a pawn. White jumps the queen to h5, creating threats against the rook and trying to generate dangerous attacking chances, though the engine notes this still leaves White significantly worse. Black retreats the king back to g8, and while the engine flags a swing here, Sindarov still maintains a clear advantage throughout these king moves. White moves the king to h1, removing it from any potential backrank threats, but this costs another half pawn according to the engine and leaves White over a pawn down. Sindarov pushes the c-pawn forward, advancing toward promotion territory, and the engine shows this is another case where Black had even stronger continuations available. The swing here is enormous at over 2 pawns, meaning c5 is not the most precise move even if the position remains clearly better for Black. White launches the f-pawn, desperately seeking counterplay and trying to open lines before Black's queenside pawns become unstoppable. Black captures the f-pawn, and while natural, the engine again flags this as imprecise with a swing of nearly 3 pawns. Sindarov is playing the moves that feel right, but missing some sharper winning lines in this complex position. White centralizes the queen, defending along the 3rd rank and keeping some coordination between the queen and the rooks. Black swings the rook to e8, activating it on the e-file, and the engine sees this as a big improvement with a 2-pawn swing in Black's favor. Suddenly, the rook is much more dangerous on the open e-file. White retreats the bishop to f2, trying to deal with the pressure on the e-file and offering an exchange of the powerful bishops. Sindarov takes the bishop, eliminating a key defensive piece and trading off another pair of pieces as the endgame grows more favorable. White recaptures with the queen, the only option, and the position now features a major battle between the queens and rooks, with Black holding a decisive material and structural edge. Black captures the e4 pawn, winning material, and the engine shows a significant swing in black's direction as the extra pawn and passed c-pawn combine to create a winning advantage. White grabs the d6 pawn in desperation, but this turns out to be a critical blunder. The engine swings by over 2 pawns, showing that white is essentially giving up the game with this capture. Black recaptures with the rook, and now the engine swings by 5 full pawns, confirming that the position is completely winning for Sindarov. White has lost too much material for any compensation. White recaptures again, but now black's queen dominates the board with no real counterplay available for white. Sindarov centralizes the queen, and the engine flags a swing of 5.5 pawns here, confirming this is now a completely won position for black with the advanced passed pawns and active queen. White tries to exchange queens and simplify into a rook in game, hoping to hold the fortress with the rook on d6. The pawn marches forward, and the engine shows another significant swing as the c-pawn now becomes an unstoppable force rushing toward promotion. White checks the king, buying time and trying to create some complications before the pawns advance further. The king steps to f8, and while the engine shows a massive swing here reflecting the overwhelming advantage, Sindarov simply keeps the pawns rolling. White repositions the rook, trying to contest the d-file and slow down black's advancing pawns. The c-pawn pushes to c3, and the engine shows a 9-pawn swing, confirming this is now completely beyond saving for white. 2 connected passed pawns rolling down the board cannot be stopped. White tries one last desperate check with the queen, but the engine flags this as a mistake with nearly a 2-pawn swing, showing that even in a lost position, white plays inaccurately. Black advances the f-pawn, creating yet another passed pawn, and the engine shows a 13-pawn swing as the position becomes completely hopeless for white. White captures the queen, finally, exchanging, but the damage is done. Black recaptures with the rook, and Wei E resigned. With connected passed pawns on c3 and f3, a dominant rook, and no material compensation, the position is completely hopeless for white. Sindarov converts with authority. What ultimately decided this game was Sindarov's relentless queenside pressure, starting with the I4 pawn advance, combined with the incredibly powerful bishop planted on d4 for much of the game, where he never found a satisfactory way to deal with both the central piece activity and the advancing passed pawns, and once the rook entered on e8, the position became irretrievable, a dominant performance by the tournament leader. Sindarov wins again and extends his lead to 5.5 points, a commanding position heading into the second half of the tournament. Can anyone catch him, or is this already a procession? Caruana, Giri, and Pragnanda will all need wins to stay in contention. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Sindarov's technique today, and do not forget to subscribe for full coverage of every round.